Because in the absence of this, you can go to a private school, of course, but only if you can afford it, right? So that means that you've still got all the public school choice options available, and that's awesome. But if your charter school is full, which happens pretty often, or if for whatever reason that's not what you want, or if you really want the private school for safety reasons or faith-based reasons or whatever, if you don't have the money and you can't go get help from a private nonprofit, you're just out of luck. You don't get to go. And this program is designed to help with that.
Welcome back to Learning Curve, where we talk education policy for real people. Today, I'm your host, Erin. I'm here with my co-host, Ross. And today we're going to jump into HB 26-1292, which is in regards to schools participating in the Federal Tax Credit Scholarship Program. And there's some interesting details about this bill that I think we want to make sure we cover and break down for you guys so you understand what's going on and why this is so important. So, Ross, I will let you take it from here.
Yeah, this is an interesting one, and it's going to require a little bit of wonky diving for a minute just to make sure that we're all up to speed, because it's one of those bills that it's only a few pages long, but there's a lot going on in it and even more to come with it because it raises some really interesting questions. So before we get into 1292 specifically, which deals with the Federal Tax Credit Scholarship Program, which is a method of providing private school choice and, in this case, public school choice to families that come from lower income backgrounds, this one is designed to change how the state interacts with that program and opts into the program in some really important ways. But before we get into that, I think it's worth talking about what a scholarship tax credit program is. These programs have been around for decades at this point. They're in, I don't know, 26 states or something like that. It might actually be 28 now. I'm not sure. But they've been around forever. And the gist of the program is this. You take private donations from individuals or corporations that are made to nonprofit K-12 scholarship granting organizations, and then the K-12 scholarship granting organizations produce scholarships for kids who would like to attend private schools and otherwise would not be able to. They're usually income restricted, which means that most of the time the kids who are eligible for the scholarships are coming from lower income backgrounds. It varies by the state. Sometimes it's 300% of federal poverty. Sometimes it's 150% of federal poverty. Sometimes you are exempted if you have special needs or you're a foster kid. But regardless, the whole point of the program is to harness the power of private donations to help kids access private schools if they would like to attend. And the way they work is the donor makes the donation to a scholarship granting organization, and then there is a tax incentive, in this case, a tax credit. So in most states, and this again kind of varies, but in most states, it's 100% income tax credit, which means that if I were to donate to a scholarship granting organization, let's say I give them $10,000, I'm going to get a $10,000 income tax credit back, which in practical terms means that if I owe the state $10,000 and I give $10,000 to the SGO, now I owe the state nothing. It just wipes out my tax liability, which is much different than a deduction. Usually when people get deductions, they're giving sort of straight up charitable contributions. They lower their taxable income by the amount that they donated, and then they get taxed at the new income level, which is a tax break, but it's not really the level of incentive that you need to drive huge amounts of money into these programs and help more kids. And so the thinking with the federal program, which came through as part of the, and I really hate saying this out loud, but the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, which is really genuinely the name of the law, was that not every state has access to these programs. So a lot of red states have passed these programs. A handful of purple states have passed them, although that's been messy. But kids in blue states, including Colorado, really don't have access to this, which means that their only way to access private schools, if they would like to go, is through charitable giving without any type of tax incentive, which lowers the amount of resources available. And the federal program was designed to sort of get around that problem by saying, well, look, we all pay federal income taxes. We can do the same thing that states do with state income taxes with your federal taxes. And now when you donate to a scholarship granting organization toward one of these scholarships, you're going to get a federal income tax credit back. So in this case, it's $1,700 per tax filing, which doesn't seem like a lot and is a lot lower than you would see in most state level credit programs. But you magnify that across hundreds of millions of taxpayers in the country and the fact that the program doesn't actually have a cap in how many credits can be given out, it's an awful lot of money, right? So the estimates vary, but just here in Colorado, we're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars in additional scholarship support for these kids. So that's kind of the setup, right?
So does this help, I would assume, this helps improve school choice, which is something that anyone who's a school choice advocate would absolutely want to support and ensure that the access for this is as open as possible in whatever state they're in.
Yeah, right. I mean, because in the absence of this, you can go to a private school, of course, but only if you can afford it, right? So that means that you've still got all the public school choice options available, and that's awesome. But if your charter school is full, which happens pretty often, or if for whatever reason that's not what you want, or if you really want the private school for safety reasons or faith-based reasons or whatever, if you don't have the money and you can't go get help from a private nonprofit, you're just out of luck. You don't get to go. And this program is designed to help with that. Here's the trick. In order for a state to participate in the program, the state has to opt in to participating in the program, which usually means that the governor has to say, yes, we want to do that. So this passed in 2025. It's obviously 2026 now. We're in the process of setting up rules and regulations to make the program work. It will officially start on January 1 of 2027. So we've got this race right now in the states to opt in or opt out of the program, which has become, as you could imagine, a pretty big political boom.
And we haven't opted in yet.
Governor Polis has said he plans to.
Okay.
So we have not officially done it yet, at least as of the time that we're recording this. But he has said in public that he intends to opt the state in.
Okay.
That's good news, right? But here's the trick. There's more to it than a binary yes-no, right? I think a lot of folks say, well, you opt in or you don't opt in, and then we're done. That's great. We blow our kazoos and we go home. But the truth is there's something in between yes or no, which is we opt in, and now we're going to talk about the rules and restrictions that we as a state apply to this program. And that's what 1292 does. It basically says that if the governor opts into this program, which again, he said that he will, the state now has these regulations that will need to be applied through the scholarship granting organizations to the private schools participating in order for the money to actually find its way to the kids. And that becomes kind of a sticky thing because private schools in general are faith-based. Not all of them. There are non-faith-based private schools out there, but there are good historical reasons like hardcore religious discrimination in the public schools, for instance, particularly against the Catholics, but also against other folks. There are good reasons for the fact that most private schools are religious schools, and they have sincerely held religious beliefs that are part of their educational program. The families who are choosing those schools are choosing them for those religious beliefs, and those are central to kind of what they're doing educationally. So 1292 says, well, that's fine, but in order for you to participate in the program, for any student at your school to bring in these scholarship dollars and use them there is going to have to be the acceptance of these non-discrimination requirements, which, and I want to be careful here because you hear non-discrimination and people say, well, you know, that's a good thing. And that's okay. We have federal statute that does some of this. This goes far beyond that. It goes beyond race, ethnicity, national origin, and gets into gender, sexuality, gender expression, all of which are really difficult for private schools to get around if they're faith-based because it conflicts with their sincerely held religious beliefs. And then it says, once you've done that, you also need to comply with all of these special needs regulations. So if you have a special needs kid come through the door, you've got to figure out a way to work with him or her to meet those needs. And if you don't do these things, then you can be pushed into this sort of penalty phase. There's a consequence for it on the back end. Private schools are not getting funding to deal with heavy special needs situations. School districts do, and even they struggle with it on a regular basis. A lot of private schools do, but not all of them can. And so requiring that, in effect, says that if you're a private school and you would like to participate in this, one way or the other, you're going to have to accept regulations that will require you to probably modify your religious beliefs and maybe bankrupt yourself on the special needs side. And then good luck out there. And the response from the private schools is, well, I don't know if we can do that.
Okay, so it feels like, in a way, potentially punishing these religious schools specifically, right, with the non-discrimination policies, potentially the special education things. And I think the other thing to consider is, do we also have some potential constitutional infringements that need to be considered in this conversation? Because obviously these religious institutions have a right to freedom of religion, and they should not be punished for such and have to go against their religious beliefs and therefore lose out on opportunities for students to attend their institutions.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, I think this is one of those situations where it depends on who you talk to, right? I'm sure that the sponsors would say they're not trying to punish anybody. They're just trying to ensure that everybody is covered by the same requirements. But the reality is that the political goal of this thing is pretty clear. And the goal is to make it so that private schools really can't participate in the program and that the dollars are available specifically for public school kids and not private school kids. Because the net result of these regulations is it will just be either religiously or financially impossible for the private schools to participate. That, of course, leaves more dollars to flow to the public school side, which is what our friends at the legislature would like to see happen. And this is sort of a convenient way to frame it in a more soft manner than just coming out and saying, we really don't think private schools should be able to participate at all. But you're right, it's not an easy question, right? There's constitutional issues here kind of out the wazoo, particularly related to free exercise in the First Amendment. And it's something that's been really heavily litigated before. So one of the things that I thought when I first read this bill is like, well, we've already had this conversation, right? So the U.S. Supreme Court has talked about this issue multiple times with Espinoza and Carson and Trinity Lutheran and a whole bunch of other cases over the course of the last decade or so that have really come out pretty clearly and said, look, you don't have to have a school choice program. But if you do have a school choice program, you cannot exclude or discriminate against faith-based schools on the basis of their religion. It has to be open to everybody. And yet here we are with the bill that does effectively exactly that.
Right. And I guess, when we talk about why should people care, how does this impact them? I think we've covered that pretty clearly, but I would assume most parents would want more school choice or as much school choice as possible, especially as we know, enrollment is dropping in public schools in Colorado at a higher rate than we've seen recently. And I think we need to find solutions, encouraging things like tax credits. I think tax credits are a great thing, especially when we're talking about providing opportunities for students. And we should be expanding as much as we can and encouraging as many institutions to participate. And so I think for parents, if you are pro-school choice, this is something to pay attention to and understand that the ultimate result of this, in my opinion, is going to be shrinking opportunities for parents to choose and choice in general for parents for their kids' education.
Yeah, and it's important. It's not a zero-sum game, right? Because there's no cap on the amount of contributions that can be taken in. So it's not necessarily the case that there's only $50 million available and we're working with this kind of crazy scarcity pie. There's effectively unlimited money available out there. It just comes down to how many people are willing to donate to it, which means that the real reason that you would want to restrict participation or lock off certain options is political, right? And look, politics is politics. Politicians are going to politician whether we like it or not. But they're setting themselves up for a pretty hard fight here, in part because this bill right out of the gate poses those constitutional issues that we talked about, which, usually you get into a constitutional fight and everybody kind of looks at it and goes, oh, I don't know how it's going to go. But like with this one, we know exactly how it's going to go because we've already had the debate.
There's plenty of case precedents.
Many times, right? So we've got that looming. And then on top of that, you've got this really interesting sort of timeline policy question, which deals with the issue of preemption. And that's kind of a fancy word for if a state law and a federal law conflict, which one takes precedent? In general, as long as the feds had the authority to make the law, the federal law controls. But what makes this one really interesting is that the federal law itself is actually fairly wide open the way it's drafted. If you sit down and read it, it's only a few pages long. It's buried down in this thousands of pages of this much larger, big, beautiful bill. And it's not super duper detailed. And instead what it says is the Treasury Department gets to make rules, which is to say that the statute passes, then Treasury gets to sit down and decide what the specific rules of how the program will operate might look like. And then the program gets to operate. But here's the kicker. We haven't seen the Treasury rules yet. So we have the big, broad statute. We haven't actually seen what the specific rules from Treasury are going to be. And now we are passing or working to pass this law that would put restrictions on the program. And we know that the Treasury rules may not show up until this summer or even this fall. So now you've got a really crazy situation where you have a federal law, maybe a state law that passes, and then a set of federal rules that might conflict with that state law. And what happens then? And that's been an interesting question for me. I've been talking to a bunch of attorneys about it. Most of them that I talked to are like, I don't exactly know. There might be something out there in water or some other area, but to my knowledge, that's never been litigated in the education space. And that means it's going to be time consuming, and that means it's going to be expensive, which kind of begs the question, what are we doing, right? Is this really a fight that we need to be having?
Right. Why not wait, at least see what the Treasury rules are, and then go from there? But again, like you said, it's the timing is interesting. Why are we in such a hurry to go ahead and implement this? And what is, along that line of questions, what is the current status of this bill? And how can people follow along and make sure, depending on if they're for or against, what can they do to be heard?
Yeah, so here's the last wrinkle in this thing, and it's kind of a complicated gobbledygook around this bill. The state is actually already involved in two different federal lawsuits on this exact issue that are separate from the ones we just talked about related to the universal preschool program, which was one of Governor Polis's big priorities. It's rolled out across the state. Full disclosure, one of my daughters takes advantage of UPK because why not? We're paying for it. But there is actually a case that looks almost identical to what this case would look like that deals with that program. When UPK went through, there was a requirement that the new Department of Early Childhood adopt rules that include these exact same anti-discrimination requirements. Those would be applied to private preschools, including faith-based preschools, which includes a bunch of these providers that run PK all the way through 12 or PK through 8 or whatever it might be. And there were a bunch of conversations with the governor's office about this when it happened. They were aware that it was going to be a constitutional challenge. They proceeded anyway, and that has produced 2 lawsuits. One is Darren Patterson v. Roy, which deals primarily with the school's hiring practices and how they're able to apply their faith and their beliefs during hiring. The other is St. Mary Catholic Parish v. Roy, which deals more with student enrollment and admissions, which are really the exact same things that we're talking about here. Those cases have been going on for years now. Both of them are working their way through the final appellate level and actually making their way up to the U.S. Supreme Court, where we may wind up having yet another fight on these same issues. But now we've restarted another bill that is going to run the same pipeline that the governor's office is already tied up with and the state is already tied up with, which is legally questionable, is the way I might put it.
Okay, so we already have legal questions, pending cases, and yet we're going to kind of just maybe ignore that, proceed with a bill that would have the exact same legal challenges and see what happens. And it just seems, I guess the timing and the rush to do it, I mean, I understand why, because again, like you said, politics is going to politics, but it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me.
No, and here's the interesting thing. So the bill was scheduled for committee actually this week on March 12th, which was very fast. This was introduced and then it was scheduled like a week later, which is usually a sign that people want to roll through this really quickly. And it was pulled off of the calendar, at least according to most folks, because the governor's office doesn't really like the bill. It puts them in a tough spot naturally, because now this is a program that Governor Polis has said he likes and he wants to opt into. He's simultaneously involved in 2 federal suits that deal with the same issue. And now his dear legislative friends have shown up with something that sort of pokes the bear in multiple places. So it's been pulled off the calendar for now, but in Colorado, every single bill gets a hearing, right? And so the sponsors have said, well, we pulled it off because we're waiting to hear what Treasury does with the rules. But Treasury is not going to give us the rules until after session is over, and the bill is going to have a hearing before then. And so there's a little bit of what I think is kind of political sleight of hand here, which is, don't worry, guys, maybe we're not going to do anything with it. When the reality is they are going to do something with it. They're going to have to do something with it. And that means that now is not a good time for parents who care about this issue to go back to sleep. It's time to start paying attention.
Absolutely. And what's the best resource for them to track what's going on and stay informed on what's going on with that?
Well, currently, the best thing to do is to go on the General Assembly's website, pay attention to when the bill is going to be scheduled in the House Education Committee. And once it is scheduled, or even before, if you're so inclined, send them a letter. Go on, find it. It doesn't have to be your legislator. It doesn't have to be somebody from your district. Go and look up the House Education Committee. We can post a link to that committee in the show notes so you can find it. And just grab their email addresses, shoot them a note, tell them what you think about it. It's important for them to be hearing about the impact this is going to have on real families. They're also going to be hearing from lobbyists and from schools and from scholarship granting organizations and from people like me, which is fine, but it's way more powerful for them to be hearing from parents and from folks who would like to take advantage of the program, particularly given how much support we're talking about, right? Like I said, this is not a couple $1,000,000. I mean, it's a huge pool of money that could help many, many thousands of kids who are going to be effectively unilaterally locked out of this so that we can tilt at legal windmills at the Capitol, which is really not good math, to be honest.
No, and there's just so many things, in my opinion, that work against this bill that to the point it just doesn't make sense. And again, that bill is HB 26-1292. You guys can, like Ross mentioned, look that up on the General Assembly website. We'll include some links in the show notes here. Anything else to close that out or wrap that up?
No, I would just pay close attention to this one because it's not going to be over even when it's over, right? So if the bill doesn't pass, I think that's good news. But even if it does, it's going to continue on into litigation and conversations that could have an effect on a lot of you and what you decide to do with these resources when they become available in 2027. So definitely pay attention. Feel free to reach out if you have questions. Otherwise, get involved, send them a letter, tell them what you think, and it's going to get real busy real quickly.
And thank you for joining us for another episode of Learning Curve. You can reach us at info@learningcurveco.org. Also, make sure to like and subscribe, share with a friend. We appreciate you all, and we'll catch you on the next episode.